Brianna should have walked away that night. Instead, she stayed, and now, 2 weeks later, she's trapped in the one place she never thought she'd face him. But this time, it's not just her ex she's hiding from. The man she's trying to avoid owns the place. But let me back up to the moment everything changed. Do you think Brianna can escape her past, or is she already trapped? Comment below and tell me what you think. And hey, if you're new here, subscribe to catch every twist in this story. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Brianna had never expected to end up here. Not in a small, corner cafe with the faint smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Not behind this counter, hiding from the very man who had once promised her the world. Her fingers trembled as she wiped down the already spotless surface. The rag in her hand, nothing more than a distraction from the chaos brewing in her mind. Her breath quickened. She knew he was here. Somewhere. The faint jingle of the doorbell made her heart skip a beat. Brianna dared a glance around the edge of the counter, her pulse spiking as she caught sight of him, Liam. Her ex. The man who had broken her, leaving her with nothing but regret and unanswered questions. She ducked lower, heart hammering in her chest, praying he wouldn't see her. Her hands were clammy, the edges of her apron now soaked through. She should have left town. She should have gone anywhere else. But somehow, fate had thrown her right back into the jaws of the one person she'd been trying to escape. Liam's voice echoed through the cafe, deep and smooth as ever, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Brianna quickly stepped away from the counter, retreating into the kitchen, hoping she wouldn't be noticed. But she wasn't so lucky. "Hey, I'm looking for someone. I think I've found her." And her heart stopped. The words were meant for her. The camera lingers on Brianna's frozen face, the flicker of a flashback, Liam's smirk as he betrayed her trust. The pain, the lies. The faint sound of her phone buzzing brings her back to reality. She glances at the screen. A message from Liam. "I know where you are." Brianna had thought she was safe. Thought she could rebuild. Start over. But now, the past was clawing its way back into her life. And this time, there was nowhere to hide. The kitchen felt suffocating, the walls closing in on her. She didn't know what to do, where to go. How could she escape him when she hadn't even escaped herself? The sound of the door opening again shattered the silence. A new presence entered the cafe. Brianna dared a glance from the kitchen doorway, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. Ethan Maxwell, the cafe's owner, the man who had unknowingly become her lifeline and now her greatest dilemma. But that's when everything changed. The bell above the door jingled again, this time louder, more deliberate. Brianna pressed her back against the cold kitchen wall, the sounds of the cafe muffling into the background. She could hear the heavy footsteps as someone made their way to the counter. And despite her desire to remain unseen, her heart betrayed her, racing faster with every passing second. A few seconds later, she heard him. Ethan Maxwell, the cafe's owner. His voice was low but clear, unmistakable. Brianna froze. "How's everything running today?" he asked, his voice tinged with that effortless confidence she had come to associate with him. She had only been working here for a few weeks, but his presence was enough to make anyone feel small. She heard him approach the counter, the scrape of a chair as he pulled it back, and her pulse quickened. Brianna barely registered the heat rising in her cheeks as she carefully tried to adjust her position, hoping he wouldn't see her peeking from behind the kitchen door. "You must be new," Ethan's voice continued, a hint of curiosity lacing his words. "Haven't seen you around before." Brianna had heard that tone before, sharp, like a businessman used to getting what he wanted. He wasn't here for casual chatter. He wanted something. She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it impossible to speak. She wanted to stay hidden, to melt into the walls and never emerge again. But that wasn't possible. Not anymore. She forced herself to breathe, her eyes darting toward the counter, watching as he casually sipped his coffee. Brianna's heart thudded as their gazes met for a brief second, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. There it was again. The way Ethan looked at her, calm, unassuming, yet somehow like he knew exactly what she was hiding. That unnerving, unspoken understanding that cut through her defenses like a knife. Ethan leaned back in his chair, never taking his eyes off her. "You seem tense. Rough day?" His voice had softened, almost like a subtle invitation to open up. Brianna's mind raced. Should she tell him the truth? Or was it better to hide behind her silence? Pretend like nothing had ever happened? The way his presence filled the room only made her more anxious. She had never been good at hiding her emotions, especially not from people who were so perceptive. Her stomach twisted into knots, and she found herself walking toward him before she could think about it. Every step she took felt like it weighed 100 pounds, her feet slow and hesitant, unwilling to close the distance between them. But as she reached the counter, her nerves got the best of her. Brianna couldn't look him in the eye. She could only focus on the coffee cup in front of her, her hands trembling as she refilled it. She silently cursed herself for not being able to control the nervous tension in her body. Ethan didn't seem to mind, though. He just watched her, silent, waiting. His presence was magnetic, like a force pulling her closer, even though every instinct inside her screamed to run the other way. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," he said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. "But sometimes it helps to have someone listen." The sincerity in his voice made Brianna's chest tighten. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had offered her an ear, let alone someone who looked at her the way Ethan did. It felt wrong. It felt dangerous. She wasn't supposed to want his attention. She wasn't supposed to want anything from anyone, ever again. But despite everything, she could feel a part of her wishing for something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. Suddenly, she heard a voice that sent a shock through her entire body. "Brianna." Her heart dropped to her stomach. It was Liam, her ex. He stood in the doorway, his presence commanding the attention of the room in an instant. Ethan's eyes flickered from Brianna to the door, the briefest flicker of recognition passing over his face. He didn't need to ask who the man was. He could see it in Brianna's wide eyes and the way her hands immediately clenched into fists. Liam smirked, the same arrogant look he always wore when he knew he had the upper hand. "Fancy running into you here," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Ethan, sensing the tension, stood up slowly, moving to block Liam's path. The cafe felt smaller now, suffocating, as the two men exchanged a long, silent stare. Brianna stood frozen, her mind racing. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. This was the moment, the one she had been dreading, the one she had never thought would happen. The moment her past came crashing back, Brianna's pulse thundered in her ears as Liam's gaze remained fixed on her. Her body froze, every muscle tense as if she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Ethan stood just a few feet away, his posture rigid, protective, and yet Brianna couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral out of control. Liam was never one to back down. He leaned against the counter, a smug grin spreading across his face as he glanced at Ethan. "You must be the boss around here," he said casually, but the underlying threat in his voice was impossible to miss. "I see you've met Brianna." Ethan's expression was unreadable, but there was a certain tension in the way he held himself, like he was preparing for something that wasn't going to go down easily. He didn't speak right away, his eyes flicking from Liam to Brianna, trying to gauge her reaction. Brianna's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, to scream at Liam for showing up here, for ruining everything again, but she couldn't. Her voice caught in her throat, and all she could do was stare back at him, powerless. The silence in the cafe grew heavy, thick with the weight of history between them. Ethan's presence felt like a distant hum now, overshadowed by the storm brewing in the air. Brianna wanted to run, to escape before things escalated, but she couldn't move. And then, just as Brianna thought she couldn't take it anymore, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The vibration was sharp, breaking the tension in an instant, and she pulled it out, her hands shaking as she saw the name on the screen. Mom. She looked up at Ethan, briefly meeting his eyes, but her gaze flickered quickly away. "I have to take this," she muttered, her voice barely audible. Ethan didn't say anything. He simply nodded, stepping back to give her space, though Brianna could feel his eyes on her as she walked toward the back of the cafe. She needed air. She needed something, anything, to steady herself. She ducked into the small storage room at the back, shutting the door behind her with a force that startled her. Her hands shook as she answered the call. "Brianna?" Her mother's voice came through the line, frantic. "Where are you? What's happening? I just heard from the lawyer. Liam's threatening to take everything from us. The house, the business, everything." Brianna's breath caught. She hadn't known it had gotten this bad. She had hoped, prayed, that Liam's threats were just words, just his usual manipulative game, but hearing her mother's panic made it all too real. "Mom, Brianna's voice cracked as she tried to steady herself. She swallowed hard. I'm at work. Just stay calm. I'll figure this out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Brianna could hear her mother breathing heavily, the sounds of her own panic echoing through the receiver. Finally, her mother spoke again, her voice softer but filled with the weight of everything they were losing. "Please, Brianna, I need you to handle this. We can't afford to lose everything. Not again." Brianna closed her eyes, the weight of her mother's words sinking deep into her chest. She felt the sharp sting of guilt, the heavy burden of being the one who had to fix everything. But how could she? Liam had taken so much from her already. What else could he possibly want? "I'll fix it, Mom. I promise. I just need time." Her mother didn't respond right away, but Brianna could feel the fear lingering in the silence. Finally, her mother sighed. "I hope you're right. Just be careful, sweetheart. Liam is dangerous." Brianna pressed the phone tighter to her ear, as if trying to draw strength from her mother's words. But the truth was, she didn't feel strong at all. She was terrified, and deep down, she knew she couldn't face Liam alone. Her heart ached as she hung up the phone. The reality of the situation was setting in. Everything she'd worked for, everything she had fought to rebuild, was on the verge of slipping away. But what could she do? Back to the cafe. Brianna re-entered the cafe slowly, her heart still racing. But now, with a new sense of urgency, she caught sight of Ethan, still standing near the counter, his expression unreadable but steady. He was waiting for her to speak. But Brianna couldn't bring herself to say anything right away. Her mind was spinning with the weight of her mother's call, and Liam's presence still hung in the air like a cloud of smoke. Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation, and his eyes softened just slightly, as though he were waiting for her to open up. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Brianna looked at him, his words catching her off guard. There was a kindness in his voice, something she wasn't used to. No one had offered her help, not like this, not when everything felt like it was falling apart. She swallowed hard, trying to find the words, "I." Before she could finish, the door opened again with that familiar, irritating jingle. Brianna glanced up, her stomach sinking when she saw who it was. Liam. Again, he looked directly at her, his eyes filled with that smug, knowing look that sent a chill down her spine. "You can't hide forever, Brianna," he said, his voice smooth, cold. And with that, the walls she'd tried so hard to build came crumbling down, and Brianna was left standing there, not knowing where to go next. Brianna's heart raced, her stomach a tight knot, as she turned her gaze away from Liam's smug face. The familiar bitterness in his tone sent a wave of nausea through her. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Liam," she muttered under her breath, trying to steady herself. Ethan, sensing the tension in the air, stepped between them without a word, positioning himself like an unspoken shield. Brianna wasn't sure if he was doing it for her, or because he sensed that Liam's presence was more dangerous than it appeared. Liam, however, wasn't fazed by Ethan's protective stance. With a slow, deliberate glance, he sized up the situation. He was good at reading people. Brianna knew that, from experience. He didn't need to say much to make her feel smaller. But the way he looked at her, disdainful yet possessive, made her blood boil. "You think this is over?" Liam asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It's just beginning. You should have stayed away from me, Brianna. I gave you everything, and you turned your back on it all." But now, I'm taking it back. Her hands clenched into fists, the raw anger bubbling just beneath the surface. You already took everything, she shot back, her voice sharp and steady despite the tremor in her chest. You don't get to come back into my life. Not now, not ever. The silence between them stretched as Liam took a step closer, his smile growing wider. Brianna's breath caught in her throat. There was something unsettling about the way he stood, like a predator eyeing its prey. Ethan stepped in before Brianna could respond, his voice cutting through the tension. I think it's time for you to leave, he said, his tone firm and authoritative, a contrast to Liam's dark confidence. Liam paused, looking at Ethan as if assessing the man. Then, with a glance at Brianna, he scoffed. You're a fool if you think she's going to run from me forever. With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the cafe, the door swinging shut with a force that rattled the room. Brianna didn't move for several moments, the air thick with the remnants of the confrontation. The sting of Liam's words still echoed in her mind, but there was something else now, something she hadn't expected. A sense of fear mingled with dread that she couldn't shake off. Ethan was the first to speak. Are you okay? He asked, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. The tension between them had shifted, but the air still crackled with the intensity of what had just happened. Brianna slowly nodded, but it was a lie. She wasn't okay. Far from it. I'm fine, she replied, her voice distant, but she could see the concern in Ethan's eyes. Ethan didn't push her to talk. Instead, he silently reached for the coffee pot and poured them both a cup. As he slid one of the steaming mugs across the counter to her, he spoke again, this time quieter, more gentle. You don't have to go through this alone, you know. Brianna's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Could she trust him? Could she let someone else in, when every time she did, it only led to more pain? She swallowed hard, shaking her head slightly. You don't understand. The words hung between them, and for a long moment, Brianna wasn't sure what to say next. She could feel Ethan's gaze on her. Steady. Patient. There was no judgment in it. Just a quiet understanding that both soothed and terrified her at the same time. Ethan, sensing her hesitation, backed off slightly, respecting her space. I don't have to understand everything to know that you're in pain, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Brianna gave him a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile, her emotions too tangled to form a coherent response. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of his offer, even if she wasn't ready to accept it. The cafe around them felt oddly quiet now, the hum of the city outside a distant reminder of the life Brianna was still trying to reclaim. But in that moment, the future felt like a distant dream. The only thing real was the fact that she was stuck, facing a past she had tried so hard to outrun. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her back to the present. She glanced at the screen. Another message from her mother. Brianna, you need to handle this now. Liam's not going to stop. He's threatening to take everything, and if you don't act fast, we're going to lose it all. Brianna's hand shook as she placed the phone down on the counter. She could feel the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her chest. There was no running anymore. She had to face it. Face him, and there was no turning back. Ethan, watching her, seemed to sense her inner turmoil. What's going on? He asked softly, the concern in his voice deepening. Brianna took a deep breath, her mind racing. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to let him in, but she wasn't sure she could. Not yet. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I have to fix this. I have no choice. The weight of Brianna's responsibilities pressed down on her like a stone, and the tension between her past and present had never felt so suffocating. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she saw Liam's face flash before her eyes, it felt as though she was being pulled further into a storm she couldn't control. She sat at the back counter, her fingers wrapped around the cold coffee mug, but she didn't taste it. She had barely touched the last few cups that Ethan had brought her. Her mind was elsewhere, on her mother's message, on the way Liam had looked at her, on how helpless she felt. The life she had worked so hard to rebuild was hanging by a thread, and the more she tried to hold on, the more it unraveled. Her gaze drifted toward the door. The bell jingled softly, and Brianna immediately tensed. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Ethan had stepped outside, presumably to take a break or deal with something. And it was in that moment of solitude that her mind betrayed her. She grabbed her phone again, her fingers shaking as she unlocked it. The message from her mother still stared at her, unrelenting. She knew what she had to do. She had to confront Liam. She had to take control of the situation before it spiraled any further. But there was something inside her, something darker, that whispered a different choice. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the counter. Brianna jumped, her heart racing as she looked up. Ethan stood there, holding a file in his hand, his expression soft but questioning. "You okay?" His voice was gentle, too gentle, but there was concern in his eyes, the kind that made Brianna feel exposed. It was a look she wasn't used to, a look that made her feel like she wasn't hiding nearly as well as she thought. She nodded, trying to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Yeah. Just a lot to think about." Ethan didn't buy it. He knew better than to take her words at face value. He slid the file across the counter to her, his fingers brushing hers as he did. The simple touch was enough to make her heart skip a beat. She quickly pulled her hand back, hoping he didn't notice the way her body reacted to his proximity. "I've been going over some of the things we've discussed," Ethan said, his voice a little more serious now. "I might be able to help." Brianna blinked, her confusion clear. "Help?" Ethan took a breath, leaning in slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't know all the details, but it seems like you've got a lot of weight on your shoulders, and I might know a few people who could help you handle things with Liam. But you have to decide what you want to do first." Brianna's mind raced. What did she want? Was she ready to trust Ethan? To rely on him, of all people, for help? He was offering her a lifeline, but she couldn't help but wonder if it came with strings attached. She pushed the thought aside. She didn't have time for doubt. Her fingers curled into the edge of the counter, digging into the wood, as if grounding herself in that moment. She couldn't keep running from this. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "I can't let him take everything," Brianna said, her voice firmer now. "I have to face him. I have no choice." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes steady. "You don't have to do it alone. Whatever happens, I'm here for you." For a moment, Brianna felt her walls crack. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there was someone in her corner who wasn't trying to use her. But the truth was, trusting people had always come with consequences. But this time, something inside her shifted. She looked up at Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'll take whatever help you can offer." Ethan smiled, and for the first time, Brianna felt a small flicker of hope. Brianna didn't sleep much that night. The events of the day had replayed over and over in her mind, like a broken record. Every conversation with Liam, every look from Ethan, felt like it was building towards something inevitable, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. When she woke up the next morning, the early light filtering through the cafe windows felt like it was casting a shadow on everything she had tried to rebuild. The weight of the decision she had made asking Ethan for help settled heavily on her shoulders. She got ready quickly, her mind still a blur. Her stomach churned, nerves tightening every time she thought about the confrontation ahead. She hadn't heard from Liam since the cafe, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he came back, demanding answers, demanding control. Ethan had told her they'd meet later that day. He had made a few calls, reached out to some contacts who might be able to help her get the upper hand. But Brianna couldn't shake the nagging feeling that no matter what help she got, this was a battle she had to fight on her own. The cafe was quiet when she arrived, earlier than usual. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but it wasn't comforting. Not today. She was running on autopilot, moving through the motions, as if her body knew what to do even when her mind couldn't keep up. She glanced around the empty cafe. Ethan wasn't here yet. She'd be alone for a while, and that suited her just fine. But then, the door opened, and Brianna's heart skipped a beat. Liam walked in, his presence filling the space like a storm on the horizon. His eyes immediately locked onto hers, a smirk creeping across his lips as he walked toward her. "I knew I'd find you here," he said, his voice low, menacing. Brianna's breath caught in her throat, and she felt the familiar wave of panic rise. This was it, the moment she had been avoiding. Liam was here, and he wasn't leaving without what he came for. The cafe door swung open again. But this time, Brianna didn't flinch. She'd seen Liam walk through that door too many times to feel the same sting of fear. This time, it was different. She was different. She stood tall, trying to steady her breath as Liam closed the door behind him. His eyes scanned the room, locking onto her with that unsettling intensity. He was calm, too calm, and that made Brianna's stomach churn even more. "You've got some nerve showing up here," she said, her voice colder than she felt. Her hands gripped the counter as she fought to keep her composure. Liam didn't seem fazed by her tone. He stepped closer, leaning against the counter, his smile sharp and calculating. "You've always been a fighter, Brianna. But you're running out of options. The longer you avoid me, the worse it's going to get." She could feel the weight of his words, like a heavy stone pressing against her chest. But she refused to let him see how much they affected her. She wasn't the same girl she'd been when they first met. She wasn't the same girl who had let him walk all over her. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm taking control," she snapped back, her voice steady now. But inside, her heart raced. Liam's expression shifted, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Control? You don't even know what you're up against." Brianna's chest tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he'd hurt her, how much he'd taken from her. But something in the back of her mind reminded her that screaming wouldn't change anything. He was dangerous, and she had to be careful. Before she could respond, Ethan stepped into the cafe, his presence as commanding as ever. His gaze flickered between Brianna and Liam, and for the first time, she saw him tense, his posture changing, like he was preparing for something. But he didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Liam, seeing Ethan, raised an eyebrow. "You're the one helping her?" His voice was mocking. But Brianna saw the flicker of something else. Fear. He didn't want to admit it, but Brianna could see that her ex was rattled by Ethan's presence. "I'm here to help her," Ethan replied, his tone calm but unwavering. He walked over to Brianna, standing slightly behind her. She could feel his protective stance, a silent reassurance that made her heart beat faster. Liam sneered, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes now. He glanced at Brianna, his lips curling into a smirk. "You think you can fix this, Ethan? You think you can just waltz in and save her?" Ethan stood his ground, his voice even. "I'm not trying to save her, Liam. I'm just here to make sure you don't tear her down again." Liam's eyes flashed with anger. He took a step forward, but Ethan moved quickly, putting himself between them. The space between them was small, but it felt like an invisible line had been drawn. Brianna could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick and electric, like something was about to snap. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft clink of cups and the quiet hum of the cafe's overhead lights. Finally, Liam spoke again, his voice low and threatening. "You think you can protect her from me? You don't know what I'm capable of." Brianna's heart pounded in her chest. She had to stop this. She had to stand up for herself for once in her life. "I don't need you to protect me," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Liam." Liam's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Brianna thought he might lash out. But then, something shifted in his expression. He seemed to recognize that she wasn't the same woman he had once controlled. She had changed, and that scared him. With one last glance at Ethan, Liam straightened up, his expression cold and calculated once again. "This isn't over, Brianna. You think you're in control, but you're not. You never were. He turned on his heel and walked toward the door, leaving Brianna standing there, her heart racing in her chest. The door slammed behind him and the cafe fell into a heavy silence. Ethan turned to Brianna, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite read: concern. Yes, but also pride. Are you okay? His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Brianna nodded slowly, still reeling from the confrontation. I'm fine. She wasn't sure if she was convincing him or herself. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You don't have to face him alone. Not anymore. Brianna looked down at her hands, which were still gripping the counter. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she could trust Ethan completely. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a possibility for something more than just survival. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fight back. The tension from the encounter with Liam lingered long after he left. Brianna stood behind the counter, her hands still gripping the edge, as though the mere act of holding on could steady the chaos inside her. Ethan had offered her his support, but a part of her still couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Liam's words echoed in her mind. You think you're in control, but you're not. You never were. The sting of that truth cut deeper than anything else. He was right in some ways. Her life had been dictated by his decisions for far too long. But that was before. Brianna straightened up, forcing her thoughts back into focus. The cafe was quiet again, but a part of her couldn't relax. She was waiting for the next move, for the next challenge Liam would throw her way. And then the bell above the door jingled again. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't Liam this time. It was Ethan. He walked in, his face serious, but not with the same guarded tension that had filled the air when Liam was around. There was something different in his eyes, something more determined. I just got off the phone with some of my contacts, he said, his voice calm but urgent. We need to act fast. I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. I'll help you handle whatever Liam throws next. Brianna nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over her. She didn't trust easily, hell. She didn't trust anyone but Ethan. Ethan was different. He hadn't left her. He wasn't scared off by Liam's threats. And he wasn't asking for anything in return. But there was still a part of her, the part that had been burned by betrayal before, that couldn't fully let her guard down. She had to remind herself that this was business. There was no room for emotion, no room for weakness. What's the plan? Brianna asked, her voice steady, but her mind still racing. Ethan's eyes darkened, his jaw setting in determination. We get ahead of him. We take the fight to Liam before he has the chance to make the first move. We gather evidence, we expose him, and we show him that you're not someone he can push around anymore. The words hit her like a wave, but instead of drowning her, they fueled her. This was it. This was the first step in reclaiming her life. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. Brianna picked it up, her stomach dropping when she saw the name. Liam. Her hand trembled as she swiped to open the message. Her eyes scanned the text quickly. You've made a mistake, Brianna. This is far from over. If you think you can hide behind Ethan, think again. I'm coming for you. Brianna's heart hammered in her chest. She had expected this, but seeing the words on her screen made it feel all too real. Ethan saw the change in her expression, the tension returning to her features. What did he say? Brianna exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the phone. He's not done with me. He says he's coming for me. Ethan's eyes hardened. Good. Let him come. His resolve was unwavering, and for the first time since meeting him, Brianna felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next few days felt like a blur of preparation, strategy, and anticipation. Brianna found herself slipping into old habits, researching, planning, anticipating Liam's next move. But this time, there was no fear, only resolve. Ethan was there every step of the way, giving her the resources and connections she needed to prepare for the battle that was quickly shaping up to be much bigger than she had anticipated. But with every step forward, the tension grew. The closer they got to the truth, the closer Liam's wrath would be. Brianna knew that nothing would be the same after this. The phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID, an unknown number. Brianna hesitated before answering, her heart racing in her chest. "Hello?" A cold, familiar voice filled the line. "Brianna." Liam's voice was smooth, but there was an unmistakable venom laced in every word. "I hope you're ready. You're playing a dangerous game, and you're going to lose. You're not going to get away from me this time." Brianna's stomach twisted, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you, Liam. You don't control me anymore." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Liam's laugh echoed through the receiver, cold and empty. "We'll see about that." The line went dead, and Brianna stood there, her hand still gripping the phone, her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew Liam wouldn't back down, but she wasn't going to either. She couldn't. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered to herself, the words both a promise and a challenge. The morning air was crisp as Brianna stood outside the cafe, the tension from the phone call with Liam still hanging heavily in her chest. She had spent the entire night staring at the walls of her apartment, her mind racing, unable to sleep. She couldn't afford to sleep. Not while Liam was out there, threatening everything she had worked for. And not while the mystery of his involvement in her family's financial struggles still lingered unanswered. She needed to understand how deep his betrayal ran, how far his reach went. Ethan had promised to help. He'd set up meetings with his contacts, offering his resources. But Brianna knew this was her fight. She couldn't let anyone else take control. Not when it was her life on the line. The door to the cafe opened, and Ethan stepped out. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain quiet intensity about him, a determination she hadn't seen before. He had become more than just her ally in the past few days. He had become her strength, her anchor in the storm. "What did you find?" Brianna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the knot in her stomach tighten as she waited for the answer. Ethan held up a thick file, one she hadn't seen before. "It's worse than I thought," he said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Liam's been pulling the strings behind the scenes, and he's got a lot more influence than we realized. But there's something else, something bigger. It's not just about the company. It's about power, control." Brianna took the file from his hands, flipping it open. The pages were filled with names, dates, and figures, records of transactions that led back to her family's business, but also to other, darker entities. Her breath caught in her throat as she read through the documents. There were accounts, investments, and deals she didn't recognize, but they were all linked to Liam. "This can't be real," she muttered, her hand trembling as she held the paper. "Liam has been using my family's business as a cover for illegal activities?" Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "It looks like it. And it's not just money laundering. There's something much bigger at play here. If we don't stop him, he could ruin everything: your family's business, my reputation, and anyone who gets in his way." Brianna felt the weight of the truth hit her like a ton of bricks. She had suspected for so long that Liam was behind the downfall of her family. But this was a revelation that shattered everything she thought she knew. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization sank in. "He's been playing us this whole time. All the deals, all the promises, they were never real. He was just setting us up to fall." Ethan's eyes softened with sympathy, but there was a hard edge to his voice when he spoke again. "We have to expose him, now, before he does any more damage." Brianna nodded, but a question lingered in her mind, one that she hadn't dared ask aloud. What if it's too late? The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and frantic efforts to piece together the truth. Brianna's mind was constantly racing, trying to connect the dots, trying to figure out where the pieces of the puzzle fit. But the more she dug, the more questions surfaced. Liam's reach seemed endless, and no matter how many people Ethan contacted, the web of lies and deceit seemed to grow tighter, more complex. Each step forward brought Brianna closer to the heart of the conspiracy, but it also brought her closer to the inevitable confrontation with Liam. and she knew it would be a fight for everything she cared about. But with Ethan by her side, she felt a sense of determination she hadn't known in years. He wasn't just helping her, he was empowering her. Together, they were a force that Liam wouldn't be able to control. Brianna stood in the conference room, her hands shaking as she waited for the others to arrive. She had made all the arrangements. She had set everything up, and now, all she had to do was wait. But the wait was unbearable. Her heart pounded in her chest as the door opened, and Liam walked in. His expression as cold and calculating as ever. He didn't even look at her as he took his seat at the table, his eyes scanning the others in the room. "You think you can pull this off?" Liam's voice was low, almost mocking. "You think you can take me down?" Brianna met his gaze, her pulse quickening. "I think it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." Liam chuckled, his eyes narrowing as he leaned back in his chair. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Brianna. You're playing a dangerous game, and you're going to lose." The words sent a chill through Brianna, but she stood her ground. This was her moment. She wasn't going to back down. Ethan stood beside her, his presence a steadying force, as they presented the evidence they had gathered, proof of Liam's illegal activities, his manipulation, and his conspiracy to take control of everything Brianna held dear. As the meeting went on, Liam's smug expression faltered. The walls he had carefully built around himself began to crumble. Brianna watched as his facade cracked, his confidence wavering. "This isn't over," Liam hissed, his voice dripping with venom as he stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You have no idea what I can do." Ethan stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "No, Liam. It's over. You've lost." The aftermath of the confrontation with Liam left Brianna both relieved and anxious. The power had shifted, but it wasn't over yet. The evidence was solid, but the legal battle was only just beginning. As Brianna and Ethan worked together to gather more information, the full scope of Liam's betrayal became even clearer. It wasn't just her family's business he had been after. He had used them to further his own criminal empire, manipulating not just Brianna, but countless others who had trusted him. With every revelation, Brianna felt a surge of anger. But there was also something else. Something she couldn't name. A sense of freedom. She had taken control, and now she was going to finish what she had started. Brianna knew it wouldn't be easy. Liam was powerful, and he had connections that went deep. But she wasn't alone. Ethan was with her, and together, they would bring him down. The courtrooms, the legal battles, the threats, none of it mattered anymore. She had already won the most important fight, the one to take back her life. The final chapter of Brianna's journey was one of triumph and healing. After everything, Liam's betrayal, the endless challenges, the fear and uncertainty, Brianna had emerged victorious. The truth had come out, and Liam had been exposed for everything he was. Ethan was there by her side, and though their relationship had started in the most unexpected way, Brianna realized something profound. She wasn't just fighting for her family anymore. She was fighting for herself, and with Ethan's support, she had found the strength to face the future on her own terms. The past would always be a part of her, but it didn't define her. She was finally